to the place where knowledge is born. We're walking to the third eye of the storm. Check it out. It's the third eye of the storm.
Thanks, Paul, so much. So, hi, everyone. This is my yearly treat, interviewing Sir Martin. We first did this interview during lockdown when we did MadFest in Elstree Film Studios, and Sir Martin was at home on a computer, laptop. So it's much more fun doing it in person. So we're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about the future of advertising, the future, I guess, the future of...
Wish we knew.
You know.
No, I don't know.
You know. Martin Sorrell is the most influential person in advertising.
I can guess, but I can't.
Well, let's hear some good
know.
guesses today.
Yeah.
And I think what I want to talk about is lots of things you're all here on the stages at MadFest today, and we heard it in Cannes a few weeks ago, but kind of Martin's view, I think, holds a bit more weight than most. So let's kick off talking about Cannes. It was a few weeks ago. I thought it was back to normal, but you described it as a tech festival.
Yeah.
What does that say about our industry?
Cannes to me has become CES, and CES has become Cannes. So, you know, we went to CES a few years ago. It was tech, and there were launches. Much less so now. It's much more a networking event. I think Cannes is don't get me wrong, it's a super networking event, but you know, it's like all other events. I think very few people go to the Palais, is my impression. They don't buy the passes because they probably become too expensive. They will take accommodation, you know, Airbnb or hotel or whatever, and hotels are super expensive. There has been gouging to a very significant degree. I mean, if you and I were, Justin, we're going to come out with a creative festival, would we pick Cannes in the middle of the summer? I don't think we would.
No.
And it's very different to Roger Hatchell's vision of what Cannes should be originally, which was, I guess, a bunch of French creatives getting together over a glass of rosé to see. But you know, people don't stay for Friday for the award ceremony. They bugger off on Thursday or early Friday, and the winners stay. And I think clients do get a kick out of it. I think our people get a kick out of it, and they want to win awards. So it's high value from that point of view, but that's degraded. I mean, I was shocked this year shocked is probably too strong, but I was surprised by how few people were in the Palais looking at the work. And I think tech has dominated, and we saw big presence this year from Microsoft, Apple, you know, a presence. Tor Myron was there and gave a very good overview of how Apple sees marketing and agencies. So the big six platforms were all there, you know, so Google, Meta, Amazon, Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok, obviously, through ByteDance. You know, Snap and Pinterest and everybody else was there as well, and, you know, the hardware manufacturers as well. But basically, I think people go there now without a pass. They walk down the Croisette, they go on the beach if they get invited, and it's become very much tech-dominated, which, to be fair, is the way the world. You know, you're talking about trends. Digital is 65%. Global media is about 900 billion, 950, around that level, and global digital is about 650. And the numbers, you know, the numbers never lie. And, you know, I give these numbers out, people ignore them, so I'll try again. You know, Google is 215 last year, probably 225 this year, $1 billion of advertising revenue. Meta, 115 last year, probably 120, 125. I think Meta is very much on the up. It was over pummeled, you know, over dismissed. And, you know, I think they've really got their act together, year of efficiency and all that. That's what the market wanted to hear. And I thought the stock was cheap at 130 and was embarrassed when it went down to 80 or 90, but it's now 280 or something. So so they're 115, probably going to 120, 125 this year. Amazon 41 last year, probably going to 45, maybe even 50. And in the prediction business, I predict they'll get to 100 billion. Okay. Alibaba and Tencent, very difficult to figure out what they're doing, but TikTok we know is this year, well, no, we don't know, we think is about 14 billion outside China, having been 10 billion last year. So they're the ones that really have got in. Apple probably last year around 7 billion. Microsoft last year around 11. That's a published figure. And Microsoft with big ambitions around gaming. Will Activision happen or not? And of course, they were the partner to Netflix. Although from what I hear, that's probably a partnership that probably won't last, because I think the Netflix people want to develop their own technology. But Microsoft is the big comer in my view, along with Apple, apart from the 6 big platforms. The other platforms, Snap gets a lot of ink, but in terms of numbers, it's about 5 billion, 5.5 billion. Pinterest smaller. Twitter was 5 or 4, has shrunk to 2.5. Can Elon do it, or can Linda do it? I think they can.
You think he can?
Yeah, I think, look, if you go back to what Musk said originally when he bought the thing, or was forced to buy the thing for 44 billion, he said he wanted to quintuple the revenue. So 5 goes to 25, and he wanted advertising to go from 100 to 50%. So that's 12.5 billion. So he was at 5. 5 to 12.5 is not impossible. I think the move today by Meta, or on Thursday by Meta on Threads, is a serious threat. Okay. And I think Snap obviously and TikTok are obviously forces as well, particularly TikTok. TikTok, it's a little mystery as to why the chief operating officer, who I thought was very impressive, resigned. Actually, whilst we were at Cannes, maybe the pressure is, I think she said past is new, or new entrepreneurial endeavors. But the pressure is quite intense. But those are the numbers, right? So the big cats are the big 6. And then you've got to think about Apple, and you've got to think about Microsoft, invading as well. And I think Apple, from an AI point of view, Apple is very secretive about what it does. My view is, they made a big play on virtual reality and vision, and the new headset. A couple of days ago, the Chinese manufacturer said they were taking down the production of it. I think it was 400,000 units. But to my mind, that's a big play, and I think Apple will do huge amounts in the AI area. So the ones you have to watch, I think, are Apple and Microsoft. Apple is now $3 trillion market value. So that to me, AI is going to reinforce that structure. Okay. I mean, despite the VC market, despite private equity, those companies, obviously with OpenAI, and Musk will put together his own AI platform using Tesla and SpaceX. He said, his engineers will be able to. But the investments needed to develop AI platforms are so huge that I think the big just get bigger. The other issue is the regulator is trying to stop the platforms from growing. You have Activision being attempted to be nixed. You have Giphy, the ludicrous decision by the CMA here on Giphy. There was no basis whatsoever to it, and I would argue on Activision also, there was no basis whatsoever. Cloud gaming was not, a discrete market that they should get, I think, worried about. What they were really saying was the big is bad. Now, if they come out and said, we think the big is bad, fine. But now what they're going to do is they're going to force the platforms to grow organically. And when you look at the research budgets that the platforms have, there was a really interesting article which was talking about the breakup of Alibaba into 6 units. Alibaba's research budget is about the same size as Oracle, and Oracle is, I don't know, can't remember, but Microsoft, Apple, Google, Meta are 4 or 5 times bigger. So pointing out that the Chinese were dividing Alibaba's budget, which is the same size as Oracle and small, into 6 pieces or 5 pieces. That was ludicrous, and I think it is ludicrous, because what those research budgets are going to generate the organic growth, and these platforms are going to become more and more, in my view, more and more significant. Now, I have a vested interest, because we have major relationships at S4, major for us, in the context of things, probably chump change, but major for us, and therefore I want to see them succeed, but I think inevitably they are.
What about, you mentioned the CMA, and obviously Google's facing multiple challenges, and the breakup of Google looks like it's becoming more likely. As the sage of Soho, as you once known, what's your view on the future outcome of this
Well, my view is, and it has shifted, over time. These companies are vital to the economy and the new dimension to it. I mean, it's always been there, but the new dimension because of the war in Ukraine and because of the question mark over Taiwan. And my view is that it is Xi's legacy, and he's going to be around for a long period of time. You know, Putin maybe not so much now, but the irony about this is that the two world leaders, you know, that turn up, you know, when they said Putin and Xi didn't turn up at the G7 or the G20 or whatever it was, I mean, the irony of that was those two are probably the ones that will last the longest. They'll be there till 2035. But Xi's legacy, to my mind, is if you read his speech at the Congress, which I have done, it's a Marxist-Leninist philosophy, and part of his legacy is Taiwan. And they will absorb Taiwan. They might slowly strangle it. They might take more extreme action, but you know, Taiwan is going to end up inside China rather like Hong Kong, for good or bad. That's going to happen. I think it will happen after the semiconductor issue is solved. In other words, if the Chinese move on Taiwan in any significant degree before we have alternative sources of semiconductor supplies, chips, there will be trouble. But if they wait, however long it takes, some people say 5 to 10 years, and Xi has that, you know, they think in 100 years it's going to happen. So my view is that these technology platforms are vital from a defensive point of view, and the companies are vital from a defensive point of view, and attempts to regulate them and hamper them, you know, you shoot yourself in the foot. Okay. Because if you're going to be defensively strong, you know, the war in Ukraine is a drone war. It's a technology war. And wars are clearly going to be fought with AI developing and AGI developing, even more on a technological basis. So having a strong technology sector, whether it be AI or whatever, is vitally important. And if you crimp them, and I think the Chinese are making a mistake splitting up Alibaba. I don't think, you know, that obviously Xi was concerned about Jack Ma and Jack Ma's prominence, and you know, he's now in Japan. So I see them just growing, and they're going to grow for a number of reasons. One of them is the regulation thing. One is the budgets they have, the scale of AI, and all those things are driving that forward. So they will act responsibly because they're being put, as you said, under huge pressure. You know, if you're a senior person at Google, you spend a very significant proportion of your management time on dealing with the regulator. You know, Matt Britton here, who runs Google in Europe, I don't know what percentage of his time he spends on it, but it must be extremely high, and it's top of his agenda. So that's going to continue, but I think it's mistaken. You know, in the world that we live in, where you have US, China at loggerheads, although I have to say I sort of got a little bit more optimistic. It was actually yesterday. I got a little bit more optimistic. I was reading a Breaking Views piece, which I think everybody should read, and it was Hugo Dixon, who started to talk about the problems that Xi has with youth unemployment, the real estate sector. I mean, some of you may have seen the social media that Chinese graduating students have put out, where they're really upset because they can't find jobs. So we used to say the Chinese economy had to grow at 6 or 7% a year to absorb the rural labor coming into the urban cities. It's not growing at that level. It may grow at 5 this year. It didn't grow at 5 last year. I think grew at 2 or 3 last year. So he has some issues to deal with. He has some big issues to deal with. So maybe things are getting, Yellen is there, Blinken has gone there recently. Maybe, this decoupling ain't going to work. We're too codependent on one another, and it's in both our interests to work together. And just one other thing, I think this continuous PR stuff that comes out of Congress, this anti-Chinese rhetoric. I mean, the Chinese are similar because they have the wolf warriors who mouth off as well, but it never does any good. You can be in the Chinese face privately. You can say to them what you really think and what you really believe. The trouble starts when you say it publicly. If you say it privately, they listen. They may not do what you want them to do, but they will listen and they will debate it and they will talk to you about it in an extremely constructive and intelligent way. If you do it publicly and you humiliate them or attempt to, that's the problem. And I really wish that rhetoric, on both sides to be fair, would go.
Let's move on to another, just conscious of time, another big issue. It's an issue that's on the stages today, it's on Cannes, which is, I mean, it's a joint thing, diversity and sustainability. Last year we did this talk on this stage and we talked about diversity, and you sort of revealed that one of your biggest, or a very senior, significant account you'd won on a diversity score. Yeah,
40% of the grade was the diversity of the team. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you what you think is going to drive change when it comes to sustainability in the advertising industry.
Well,
and will it be the same as diversity?
You know, given the frictions, and given the US-China, given the war in Russia, the war in Ukraine, given Iran, those are the three big macro political issues. Given that, we're going to see more fragmentation geographically. So just very simply, US and Latin America become more important as a solid sort of block. The Middle East becomes more important and Asia becomes more important, with a question mark over China. If you have a big position in China, do you go further? If you have a small position, you do go further. But markets like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia are all going to become more important in the context. India in particular, India wins. India will be the third largest economy in 2050. So with that as background, that's one thing. The second thing is, technologically, AI is fundamental, and it's a wholesale revolution. If you think the web was important, or if you think the smartphone was important, stand by. We've already seen, just very quickly, big impact on visualization and copywriting, big impact on hyper-personalization. We can hyper-personalize, target consumers to a far greater, so our Netflix campaign, which was 1.5 million different creative assets, can be multiples of that now. Media planning and buying revolutionized. Now, algorithms are going to replace 25-year-old media planners in fairly quick time. There won't be 250,000 people at the holding companies running media planning and buying networks around the world. AI is a super tool to improve productivity. That's a fourth area. And the fifth one is spreading knowledge inside the company. Those 5 things we've already seen, and that's going to have huge repercussions to democratizing information inside companies. Everyone will be able, assuming the data is good, and have open access to access that information. That flattens organizations, removes bureaucracy, makes companies much more agile, in my view. Sustainability and diversity, unfortunately, given the economic pressures, given the lower GDP growth, higher interest rates, and higher inflation, higher interest rates, which I think are going to stay with us at higher levels than we've been used to, lower GDP and higher levels of inflation and interest rates, given that the priority for CEOs, I was watching that New Balance presentation which talked about, which you did, which are all very well and good about attention and everything else and lift. But any CEO looking at that is going to say, where's the beef? Where's the sales? And like it or not, people are moving down the lower down the funnel to activation and performance measurement and return on assets and return on sales. That's really the center and focus of attention. Diversity and sustainability, sadly, takes a little bit of a backseat from that. Okay. The biggest driver of change, my view, has always been procurement. The instance you're talking about, 40% of the grade, it was one of our tech clients, 40% of the grade was on the diversity of the team. So if we walked in with a non-diverse team, we wouldn't get to first base, let alone hit a home run. I think Mark Pritchard has given instructions inside Procter. If you walk into a room and the agency doesn't have gender representation, doesn't have racial representation, you walk out. So I think it is genuine, it isn't greenwashing, it is fundamental, but sadly, because of the economic pressures, which are huge, there is a disconnect that I'm seeing at the moment between what CEOs say and how companies are behaving, right?
In what way?
Well, budgets took a long time to fix, in our experience, at the end of 22 going into 23. there's a lot of uncertainty around. I mean, Cannes, going back to your first question, Cannes to me was sort of, Cannes gets planned a year in advance. So really, what you saw at Cannes this year was the thinking last year. If you plan Cannes now, it would be very different, in my view. People will be very much more concerned about expense, flamboyance, and the like. And I don't think it does the industry a great service for people, for CEOs of clients to observe the shenanigans that go on there. And I think it's, it could be a little bit better balanced to be fair. But that's a reflection of the times. And I think 23 is not a great year. And I think 24 is going to be a tough year too. Again, maybe spreading a little bit of gloom, but I think it's a realism. I think things change after the US presidential election in 24, whoever wins. We'll see whether Trump gets Trump looks as though he'll get the nomination from the Republican side, head-to-head against Biden. The polls sort of indicate that Biden would get it. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's amazing, but and I have to say, when you talk to U.S. businessmen, although they publicly say Trump is anathema, privately, the simple fact of the matter is, and it's the harsh reality, is when Trump was president in 2016, although it was a shock to the system, I mean, Hillary didn't get the win, the Dow and economic GDP didn't do too badly. He's low reg, low tax. And that appeals to the business community, like it or not. DeSantis is a more sort of acceptable version, but in the polling so far, he doesn't seem as though he has the beef.
Well, I think that's kind of a insightful, slightly depressing way in which to end, but I absolutely love this conversation. We're back next year, and we'll talk about the...
And Stormy wins.
Stormy wins. You heard it here first. So, sir, welcome. Thank you so much.
I came prepared for the rain, hail, sleet, snow, whatever the weather we ride. Let my people